Speaking of things that people can look at in their walkthroughs, investors, potential purchasers, another one is water pressure, right? So, and the way we typically test that, just a simple functional flow test, is to go to, especially an upper floor, right? Because we're fighting the head pressure. Water has to go up. It work hard to get to the top floor. Go up and operate multiple hot water fixtures, because typically the hot water piping is more subject to that mineral accumulation that results in reduced flow. The largest demand on hot water flow is typically the bathtub. So first I'll go to the sink, turn the hot water on at the sink, then flush the toilet, and then open the bathtub hot water faucet. And then while I'm looking at the sink hot water, I'll throttle on and off the bathtub hot water and see how much fluctuation there is in that sink hot water. And that's typically a pretty good indicator of how much time we have left on the need to replace the old galvanized pipe. Or perhaps there could be some other issues too, right? There could be clogged aerators. There could be an undersized or leaking water service, an old lead service. So you can't typically, just by that simple functional flow test, you get a feel for the general water pressure in the building, but you can't usually pinpoint the exact cause.
Right, but you know if you have an issue or not, potentially, just on an initial walkthrough.
Right, and then your observations in the basement, if you find or behind the vanity cabinets in the bathrooms, if you see old galvanized piping, then you're pretty sure what the deal is. Right?
I'm Drew Breneman, and this is the Rise and Invest podcast. I bought my first 2 properties as a 19-year-old with my own money that I earned from an online business I started in high school. I've now grown my portfolio from that first duplex to hundreds of millions of dollars of investment property. My goal with this show is to give you the resource I wanted when I first started out. Subscribe to our podcast where I break down real-life stories, tactics, strategies, and current market information you need to be a successful investor. Welcome to the Rise and Invest podcast. I'm your host, Drew Breneman. With me today is Dan Cullen. Welcome.
Thanks, Drew.
Great. Dan's the founder of Domicile Consulting, a physical inspection company inspecting buildings in Chicago. I wanted to have him on here and just go over some inspection stories, what to look for, just kind of pick his brain, everything inspection-wise. Kind of interesting how we met. I was just asking him if he knows if they're still number 1 on Yelp for Chicago or not. But that's how basically we met. I had I think bought like 3 or 4 buildings here already. Every inspection I did was with a different person. I didn't like basically what they produced for the physical inspection when we were buying it. And then maybe on my 4th or 5th deal, I was just like, I need to just go on the internet basically and try something new. And then you guys were number 1 on Yelp and had the owner come out and inspect, and you did a great job. And probably like 10 plus inspections later, here we are.
Did you read through the reviews or just look at that number 1 rating and go with that?
I think I did. I always read some of the reviews, and then to something on Yelp, you can see also the ones that are hidden. Yeah. It's because I don't know how that works. I don't have a Yelp page.
Well, one way it works is if the reviewer, the person reviewing the service or business, doesn't have more reviews. If they only reviewed that business, then they're going to push them off to the side. Which
that's interesting.
Kind of sucks a lot, right? Because you can get some really glowing reviews, and because they didn't review any restaurants or anything like that, hair salons, they're not shown.
That's interesting. Yeah, because then they think it could be a fake review.
Exactly.
But it might just be someone who's
or prompted or paid for.
Yeah, but it might just be they're compelled enough to finally leave one.
Exactly.
So I mean, I have not left a lot of reviews, but I have left some, but if I have a Yelp account, it's probably like that, that 1 review. But nice. Yeah, that's, and then I guess speaking of reviews, I mean, if anybody really would help the podcast, if we could get more reviews and ratings on Apple especially, you can go on there and then you can give it a 1 to 5 star rating. Obviously 5-star would be appreciated. And then you can write up a little thing there too. This is also on YouTube. You can go on there and like and subscribe. Comment, just so anybody listening, that would really help us get the podcast out and just kind of feed those algorithms and get more engagement, get the
Are you on Stitcher?
podcast out. I don't think so. We
How
use
about
that.
Spotify?
Yeah, Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Great. So, what would you say? How many properties do you think you've inspected over the years?
Probably 10,000 or so.
Okay,
I
nice.
started doing in the actual inspection industry. I started working for a company that was a vendor to Allstate and some other homeowner insurance companies, and I started doing insurance inspections. So when a homeowner would buy a new house and have to have a new insurance policy written, I would go out and look at the house. I mean, they were pretty cursory.
Yeah,
I
we've
think-
had those.
Yeah.
yeah. We've every time we buy one, a property they usually send out an insurance inspector.
Yeah.
Some with COVID now they're doing it online, or they have like a what do you want to call it? Like a form to fill out almost online. Yeah,
Oh,
it's like
okay.
on their app, or we need pictures of the electrical panel and different things. So
Right.
Anyways, keep going.
Oh, so they'll have the homeowner send in photos.
Yeah,
Interesting.
on the last few apartments we bought,
Wow.
it wasn't. They instead of sending the person out, it was you do the work.
That reminds me. So we'll talk about that later. But people are trying to combine AI into the inspection industry. It's
Oh, really?
interesting. Yeah.
Okay,
I've got a couple
I'll
stories about
put that
that.
on
But,
here at the end.
but yeah, so I did insurance inspections for about 3 years, and then I ran into a guy who had an inspection business. And his inspection business started, his name was Ron Gann, and he had a company called the Homestar Group working mostly on the north side of the city. And he started out because he was the first contractor outside of Boston that this old house had on their
Oh,
show.
really?
Right.
Okay,
They
nice.
did a Greystone rehab here in Chicago. And that kind of, put his name out there. And he started a home inspection business after that.
Nice.
And he had a multi-inspector firm, and I went to work for him in I think 96 or 7 or something like that, and worked for him for about 3 years, and then I went out on my own around 2000 or so.
Great.
So-
And then that's so 10,000 buildings. Then you've learned. a
Yeah,
thing or two.
easily, and that's just inspections. That doesn't count when I was a contractor, and I would, look at homes for proposals and estimates and stuff.
Yeah, because then maybe just if you want to run us quickly through your background, because it's an interesting
Sure.
sort of progression here.
So in the what they call the built environment industry, I started out when I was about 14, helping my dad doing tuck pointing, and then I read an ad in a local paper. They were looking for people to become carpenters in the apprenticeship program in the city here, and I applied for that, took a test, and shortly after started my carpentry apprenticeship. That was 1976. And I did a 4-year apprenticeship, became a journeyman in 1980. And then same 1980, I got on the Chicago Fire Department. So I did carpentry work, and I was a fireman for the next 20 some years.
Full time or was it?
Full time, kind of both. So
Wow.
some had full time jobs. Yeah. So, as a fireman, we work 24 hours and then we're off for 48. So even on a really tough day, you still have at least one day in between shifts at the fire department to do outside work. So yeah, so I had a remodeling and construction business, mostly down in Beverly. Worked on a lot of big older homes. One time we did a 1.5-year project on a 9,000 square foot mansion. Basically did a gut rehab, and it was one of the local Channel 2 broadcasters. He bought it, him and his wife, and that was a fun job. So
Nice.
And then, like I said, I ran into this guy that had a home inspection business. He was looking for somebody, and I worked for him for a couple of years, learned a lot from him. And then went on my own, year 2000 or so. And that was tough. I had no technical background. I did a little bit of work for a guy out of Colorado who was doing investor inspections in the city. And those inspections were so, we had to not only do photos of everything, but also a walkthrough with a video camera. And I had to download a lot of stuff. And this was 2000.
Yeah.
It was a little early in the digital revolution, and I needed a lot of care and feeding to
Yeah.
come up to speed on that. So,
Back then, how did you even get the videos to them?
man, that was so long ago.
And there's really
It was all over the internet. So,
that's interesting that
yeah,
it was
that
sent way.
volume of information was able to be.
I mean, honestly, I thought you were going to say we put it on disk drive and mailed it.
I don't think so. Now the insurance inspections, that was, strictly 35 millimeter and go to Walgreens and all that. So, but
I mean, I remember that from my childhood. And I was going to the camera store and looking at what's in there. And
right.
Cases would be hot from the lights and
the little plastic canisters.
Yeah. But then, all right, well, great. What is a inspection, let's say, range these days? So then, if you want to give a different answer for homes and investment properties, but how much?
As far as cost?
Yeah.
Well, obviously that varies from inspector to inspector, and for a new inspector, the primary way they're going to compete in the industry is by pricing, right? So, I mean, you'll see guys out there who are advertising, inspect any home for $195 or $250 or whatever. But our basic inspection for, say, a one-bedroom or a studio condo, I think that's $350 or $375. And then for something like, let's say, a 5-bedroom home that's maybe 5,000 square feet, that's, in the $900 some range. So, and then radon testing, which really every homeowner should have before they buy a house, that's around $200, $225 extra. So.
And then what about investment properties? What would the range be? People are thinking about that.
I just look at the property on LoopNet or look on Google Earth and try and get a feel for how long it's going to take and if I'll need other help on it, another inspector or even a specialist to come out, like an electrician, commercial electrician or something.
Yeah.
And then just price it kind of off the cuff. Just like the podcast, Joy.
Yeah.
Let's say yes and figure it out.
All right. Yeah, no, sounds good. I mean, my answer from what I've seen, it depends on the property size and company, and this isn't just domicile, but depends on the size. I think we've paid between $2,000 and $15,000 for some. Right. I mean, obviously the $15,000.
Yeah, call me on that next $15,000.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That one was, I think 100 units, give or take, and then that also included, they brought a pest inspector, cambered the sewers.
Right.
That's just like a rough number. It might have been 10 or 12. But I mean, let's just get into that now. Why should people radon test properties then?
So radon is kind of like carbon monoxide. It's odorless, invisible, can't taste it, smell it, or anything. So, and yet it's deadly, like carbon monoxide. However, it doesn't make the news like when a family dies because their furnace was blocked, right?
Yep.
So with radon, the damage is done over time. And there's the EPA attributes 22,000 radon-induced lung cancer deaths every year.
Wow.
Yeah, from exposure to radon in the home. So yes, everybody knows we're spending more and more time indoors now, and especially when we have a finished basement, you really should get a radon test done because there's no way to know, no matter what the local activity is for radon levels, there's no way to know what your specific results are going to be unless you test that house. So you can have really high levels in one home and right next door basically zero because it's based on geological formations, and they're basically, radon is the result of decaying uranium deposits below ground.
Interesting.
And it filters its way into the home through the foundation.
Yeah, it's real local to where the house is.
Absolutely, right. And to the specific geological formations below the house, soil characteristics, stuff like that. So in conjunction with a real estate transaction, the typical radon test is 48 hours. That's really the minimum. And it's really kind of inadequate because radon levels, if you ever looked at a graph of daily radon levels, they can fluctuate greatly. And the longer term the test, the more accurate the test. But because of the exigencies of a real estate transaction, right, everybody needs everything done quickly, we're only allowed by state standards 48 hours basically to take to do the test. So you can get false negatives or false positives depending on the environmental conditions, the conditions going on inside the home during the duration of the test. And so we, in conjunction with every radon test we do, we recommend that homeowners buy their own personal radon monitor and put it in their house. And then they can do that long-term test. They're IoT devices. They can constantly monitor radon levels in the home. And some of the devices measure other indoor air quality parameters as well, like volatile organic compounds, VOCs, carbon dioxide, which is a really good indicator of indoor air quality, humidity levels, etc.
Interesting. Nice. And those kind of devices, those are just, you just buy them at Home Depot or Amazon?
You can. They're getting more and more common now. The company whose devices we use for the professional radon tests, it's called Corentium. They're out of Norway. It was a company put together by scientists from CERN Labs in, I believe it's Switzerland. They make a homeowner device now too.
And then the one
It's only a couple $100.
that can detect the different compounds in the area you're talking about, is that one?
$200 or $300. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And what's the name of that company again?
Air Things.
Air
the
Things?
parent company is Corentium.
Okay,
but airthings.com. Yeah.
Download our 100-plus page passive investing guidebook today at riseinvest.com/downloads. Accredited investors can sign up for our multifamily investment opportunities by hitting the Invest Now button on our website. Now back to the show. So then what as a investment property, and you've bought investment properties too.
Yeah,
and
a couple small ones. A few small ones, rather.
So, and then what would you think, what would you say investment property buyers, what should they be thinking about or looking for when they do a physical inspection?
That's a great question, Drew. So obviously the big difference between investment property purchasers and people who are buying a home for themselves and their family, a lot of that is, on one side you're looking at dollars and cents mostly, and the other side there's a big emotional component to that transaction, right? So you want to know how to optimize that property within reason, right? We're not going to go in there and gut everything and redo it as new, but you want to know how to make that property safe, durable, comfortable, and efficient, right? And I think the same holds true for most investment owners, because all those things translate into money in the end, right? Or liability, right? You're doing due diligence. You want to make sure that you're not opening yourselves up to some kind of liability from the occupants.
Right? And
right?
what will be some examples of issues like that where you
some
liability?
Of the investment properties I've looked at, particularly some of the ones in outlying areas, like the one investor I told you about who's buying in Peoria area and Rockford. Like there's buildings built in the 70s. There was a lot of building in the 70s, multifamily building, and a lot of the gas forced air furnaces are still the original from the 1970s.
Wow.
And they are in atrocious condition in every way: safety, efficiency, and comfort. And but some investors just look at it strictly like, price per unit, how much I'm gonna have to put into it, and it's all just numbers to them, And when I look at a property for my own purchase, I'm looking more at, how was this building constructed? How has it been maintained over the year? What's kind of the soul of that building, right? And do I want it to be a part of my psyche, right? Because I can't, I'm not an investor in that way, like just dollars and cents,
I know what you mean. And two, I think it's hard to put into how to describe maybe what you're talking about if you were to say, here's what to look for. But you can tell when you go to a building if the prior owners have done a good job with maintenance, if they've, let's say, cared about it.
Exactly.
Or they're just sucking money out of it, basically.
And they're looking for the cheapest fix on every single issue that comes up, right?
There was a deal I remember we were looking to buy, and they was touring it with the builder, and they had, going down to the lower level, they had wood stairs. They had built-ins in the wall, and then I think a wood tile, or a tile that looked like wood in the basement. And I remarked to them, like, this is stuff in, like, if it's in Chicago, this is like in $1 million homes. This is not in an apartment building.
Right.
I mean, stairs, you put carpet on that and keep it cheap. And then why are you doing built-ins? It's, if you're trying to just go the cheapest routes, you could tell that building, they were not going the cheapest route. So if that's what they were doing with what you could see, my opinion, I can't see in the walls, as some inspectors like to say, that they don't, I don't know for sure what they were doing, but if they're going to that extent outside, like, I feel good about that one.
Yeah. There's less of a chance that you're going to find some concealed or latent issues down the road. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then but let's say, okay, you're, what would be some red flags? And let's ask that maybe a different way. You're going there, and here are these, like, the top things to be concerned about.
Well, first of all, I cite the walls, right? You look outside from a distance and you look at the building from all angles and you look for deviations, right? You look for leans, for hogs in the wall, on what they call in the
Yeah.
masonry trade. You look at the windows and doorways to make sure they're not skewed, signs of unanticipated structural or foundation movement, and just get a general sense for, of course, I'm sure you've run into issues with moisture in your buildings, right? Water winds is what people say. Moisture management is huge, and most of that results from how the exterior walls were constructed. We talked a little bit before about the difference between new buildings and old buildings. And older buildings were built with more mass, right? The materials were generally more robust. They can take some moisture exposure without starting to crumble. They can get wet and dry and get wet and dry without a lot of outward sign of deterioration. And new buildings are pretty much the opposite, right? They're built with materials that are lighter, less dense, and more subject to deterioration from moisture exposure.
Yeah, and that right before, that's one thing before we turn the mics on, we were chatting about, because it would surprise people where you would think, I'm buying a new property, this should be, essentially, there's no issues. Or if you're buying a 100-year-old building, there's going to be a lot of issues.
Right.
And from my experience, I would say it's really the opposite.
Absolutely.
Where, right, when you say more dense, what that looks like, let's say with the masonry, it's 3 bricks deep, and then in the wall, then you don't really even need insulation then, and then water, it's very tough to get in through all that. Where nowadays you build something new, you have like a cinder block behind it, and then a space, and then 1 brick. Where now it's with the design saying water will get in, and then we'll have these flashings and catch the water and go out.
Right.
Which are, the flashings are always ripped or missing, or some. I don't think I've ever been to a building where I've been like, oh, this was flashed really well. I'm feeling good about this new building.
Right.
Usually it's the opposite, where you're just looking at a new building and there's a issue. And we've had, whether it's from a roof or masonry, we've had, I don't know, like a lot of water all over the place. So if you're a new investor, like, and you're buying brick buildings, like, that's actually surprisingly to be expected if you're me at this point, that there will be taking some water. Where, like, my grandparents, they had this brick duplex in Milwaukee that they lived in for basically their whole lives. And
Never
then,
leaked, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like a bomb shelter, basically.
Right.
Like, this thing was solid and had a pitched roof, which that's something.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah. Why don't you, so if you're looking at a building.
So if you're looking at a building, especially a concrete block building, right? They call that single wythe construction. You said how these older buildings had 3 layers of brick. Those are called wythes, right? That vertical plane of brick. And each vertical plane has a space in between. So that's why it's so hard for water to get all the way to the interior, because you have the outside facade of the brick, then a space, another vertical layer or plane of brick, and then a third one. And for water to get all the way through to the interior is pretty difficult. So
yeah, and then sometimes they turn one of the bricks too, make it a longer.
Well, yeah, that's how in older buildings you can tell if it's brick veneer or solid masonry, right? If it's 2 layers or more of brick, or just 1 layer over a wood frame wall. If every 7th horizontal course they turned 1 brick sideways, that's how they locked those 2 wythes of masonry together. Just like if you're stacking pallets, stacking boxes on a pallets, right? You're going to turn 1 sideways to lock those together. It's the same thing with the masonry wall. That's how they did it. Nowadays, they'll use masonry anchors or ties, galvanized or stainless steel ties that are concealed, and they don't turn that brick sideways anymore. That's called the head joint that you would see, the edge of the end of the brick.
And that's going in through the brick and then the block behind it then, or where's that
Yeah,
going?
and you can have either brick and brick, right? 2 brick wythes or planes of brick, or brick and block. And the reason people use block is because they're bigger, less labor intensive to lay them, right? You can lay a lot more block in one day than you can brick, and labor, everybody wants to keep labor costs down. So, but yeah, we had a presentation. I was a member of have you ever heard of ACTHA, Association of the Condominium and Townhome Association of Condominium and Townhome Associations.
Okay, nice. No, I haven't. I try to stay away from
Associations.
any kind
Yeah,
of association. If I can.
But anyway, I was a member, and
Yeah.
we had a presentation by a forensic building investigator, and that's exactly what he said. The bulk of his work is new construction because it's much more subject to moisture penetration issues.
Yeah.
And water is what creates most problems in buildings.
Yeah. So then just to circle back, so for issues or call it red flags, number one was structural. If you see something bowing out or not
Right.
straight, or you're a good one was if the doors aren't closing,
Yeah.
let's say it's hitting or the locks don't line up. Could be something just related to the door. It could be something with foundational and structural.
Yeah. Or it could be normal lumber shrinkage. A lot of the lumber is damp when it goes in and then shrinks over the first year or so as the moisture kind of acclimatizes, and then that can cause some movement too.
What should someone, and this is a lot of this I already know, but I'm trying
Sure.
to get it out. So for the people that don't know, what would someone do? Would you recommend they do? They do see what looks like maybe a slant in the building, some sort of settling. What's the next step? You just run from it, or what would you recommend they do?
My first thought when I see something like that is always, why buy a crooked building, right? I mean, if there's no other buildings available, well, okay, maybe I'll buy that one, but it's going to be kind of a hindrance
When you
to
go
any
sell.
future
Yeah.
sale, right? But sometimes a foundation issue can be a buying opportunity, right? A lot of people will run from a foundation issue, but typically they're quantifiable and repairable, right?
Yep.
Have you had any?
Not really. What I was thinking you were going to say is you would call an engineer next, like a structural engineer, someone who specializes in that. Because my experience so far is you have out of the buildings that are, let's say look like they're have an issue. I mean, it either does or it doesn't, but it might be done settling, or it could be something that Chicago, there's a lot of really old buildings. This happened 90 years ago, and then it's just been like that for 90 years. And then there's stuff they can check where they go, okay, but then this was renovated 20 years ago, and there's no cracks in the drywall, and all the doors are fine. They look at the basement and do what they do, and they go, this happened a long time ago. It's not ongoing.
Sure.
So good point on resale value, I guess, where why take the risk? But if you really want that deal, I mean, the next step would be get
Either a structural engineer or especially on smaller properties, I often recommend hiring or calling a foundation repair contractor directly.
Oh, interesting.
Because structural engineer is going to be a pretty significant charge for even a minimal review, right?
But then would you? I mean, personally, I'd probably be concerned. You send out a foundation company.
They have a dog in the fight,
you need
right?
a foundation, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are one or two in the local industry that I trust, and I've worked with them on problem-solving deals, and I know that they're not one-size-fits-all repair people, right?
Okay.
Where it's going to be the maximum.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Do you want to give their names or those companies?
The one that leaps to mind is Atlas Restoration, and I've seen them, the co-owner of the company, out with a garden hose flooding a foundation, trying to show that this is exactly where it's leaking, this is exactly what needs to be fixed, instead of, hey, you need a whole perimeter drainage system installed, right?
Oh, nice.
So I like to see people like that.
Yeah,
you can tell that the best interest of the client is at heart, not necessarily the best interest of the company.
Yeah, that's great. And so Atlas is the name.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, then what do you think are some things that are either issues or things that most investment property buyers aren't thinking about? They get going on a deal, inspection comes.
Well, on smaller buildings, especially in this city, a lot of times the electrical feed is undersized, right? You might have a 6 or 8 unit building with 200 amp service and 6 or 8 air conditioning condensers that are all running at the same time in the summertime, and that's an undersized service, right? So a lot of folks don't realize that that's a significant expense. It could be 10, 15 grand or more to upgrade all that stuff.
Yeah, just on a 6 unit, we were adding a 7th unit. And one of the things that was required on the permit was to
Upgrade
the service. Yeah.
to 400 or 600.
I don't remember, but it was 15,000.
Yeah,
Was it at the
okay.
time, and that was in 2017. So
Yeah.
it's not today's price
Right.
anymore. But that at the time, that's what it was.
Right.
And
And
that,
along the same lines is the water service, right?
yeah, and that they and that's real common here, where you have a
Lead.
pipe
Right.
right coming in, and then it's like, great, this person's doing an upgrade, perfect
Yeah.
to get the city to
Right.
upgrade the pipe on your dime, but also, I mean, needed where the water pressure could be low, and I mean,
Right.
how long you want water running through lead pipes,
Right.
you can avoid it. Nice. Yeah. Then what about, let's say you're buying an investment condo. One thing that I've found interesting is now, like, a lot of folks will just go in and just inspect that unit.
Right.
What's your approach?
So that's called a paint to paint. If in the inspection industry, it's called a paint to paint inspection, right? And a lot of inspectors feel that that helps limit their liability when they're not looking at the common areas. I think it's just the opposite, right? You got a client who's buying into a 3, 4, 6, 8, even a 10 or 12 unit condominium building. That's a lot of exposure, right? If something major needs to be done to that building. So I think it's incumbent upon any diligent inspector to look the entire building over as much as is accessible and reasonable. Obviously, in a high-rise purchase of a single unit in a high-rise building, you're not going to be crawling all over the outside. But on smaller buildings, you should be able to give your client a pretty good idea of what upcoming major expenses might be, because there's a lot of smaller condominium buildings in the city. We talked about leaking masonry, right? Single wide concrete block construction, split face block,
Yeah.
that have been leaking for years and years and have never been properly fixed.
Yeah, we have had, I don't want to, I guess, be too dramatic, but so many problems with water at these multi-unit buildings we have that are brick.
Right.
And I always think to myself, wow, if this was a condo building, this would be a total disaster.
Yeah.
But as the owner of all of it, you just, all right, this leaking's coming through the second floor, hitting the first floor, then collecting in the finished basement.
Right.
I mean, imagine if you just own that last unit in the basement and it's just leaking above you and no one will do anything.
Right. Because it's not affecting them.
Yeah, and also
Right. And there's the absentee owners.
Yeah,
right?
or you really, none of the people are in real estate either.
Yeah.
It's, you have other professions as owners. Right. No one really knows what to do.
But they're getting advice from their brother-in-law and their cousin and everything, and they're telling them, what needs to be done, and nobody can come to a conclusion.
Yeah,
and in the meantime, you're sitting in a swamp. Right.
And for us, it's, and also people, move in and out. So we see that, we go, all right, we're not going to re-rent the unit, pull the floor up,
right,
repair that, and then work our way up, fix the problem.
Right.
Then you can get in everybody's unit.
Yeah.
And then where if this is homeowners, this is, so I think that all the time, where we've had all sorts of problems and everything's fixable. And we found a really good contractor here in Chicago who's been a lifesaver on these kind of issues, because we can get them out for, let's say, smaller stuff, but it's like a very difficult.
Is that masonry related or everything?
You know who it is. It's Tom.
Tom.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he been just a lifesaver on these kind of things.
I love meeting guys like that.
Yeah.
Just a wealth of knowledge and very trustworthy.
Yeah. And so that's, but I always think, wow, if I owned this like unit on the bottom, like it's just so difficult. Yeah. So then even for myself, like I guess I've seen so much of that. I went from just renting to buy a house, and now just back into an apartment where I don't want to be. I don't want to buy a condo unless this would be maybe in like a high rise where I don't want to. Yeah. But even that, I guess you've inspected a lot of high rises then, and what would you? So then, is there any? So I've seen a lot of issues with these deals. Everything I bought's been 4 or 5 stories or less.
Okay.
And then, let's say brick, really just brick construction here, and usually a flat roof, a couple pitched roof deals. But so that's my experience. But then if, let's say you're buying a condo and it's a 12-story building, and maybe are those built any differently in a meaningful way when you inspect them, or were those having a lot of
talking new construction?
Just, I guess, either older or new.
So with new construction, what has been done more lately, thank God, is what they call compartmentalization, right? So the individual condominium units are sealed off from the other units and from the common areas like the elevator hoistways, the plumbing chases, and that. Because if, God forbid, there's a fire in one of those units and there's communication of smoke, which is the big killer in a fire, right? You're in trouble. But if you're compartmentalized, right, you don't have a constant stream of air flowing into your unit from surrounding parts of that building, you have a much better chance of sheltering in place and being safe until the fire department can.
But how are they compartmentalized? Like double drywall is what comes to mind, but you would need more than that.
But also air sealing, right? Because air is what transports not only smoke in the event of a fire, but also moisture, odors, right? Your neighbors are coming home and enjoying a nice smoke,
Yeah.
right, after work, or they're cooking some objectionable, strongly scented dish. You're not being exposed to those odors if you're properly compartmentalized.
And I think what people need to realize too, where like some realtors, or whether it's commercial brokers or realtors for individual single families, like some take that role like I'm an advisor and I'm here to advise you, and like they're really doing what's best for you.
Absolutely.
And then others, it's just a pure sales role.
Right.
This is the listing. I want to sell it.
Right.
And then it happens a lot with these investment properties where people will remark to me like, I don't understand why they don't know more about the property or don't have this question answered. But it's like, for some, it's like we have the listing and we're going to sell it and I'm off trying to get the next listing.
Right.
And so, yeah, to your point where they're not studying up necessarily on the importance of running a camera down the sewer, because that's just, that's not helping them.
It's another
get sales.
hurdle.
So it doesn't, everybody's different. And to me, some people take it as advisor, some take it as sales. And then, if you're talking with the sales folks, that's just or just say something and let's keep this deal moving.
No, there's some great realtors out there. I've been astounded at some of the information that some realtors can provide to clients during the purchase process. And then, of course, there's the other flip side, right, where it's strictly like how to get the buyer excited, right?
Yeah.
And ensure that the deal happens. Compartmentalization.
Yeah. How are we doing that? Like, so double drywall maybe for fire, and then there's some sort of
but the double drywall doesn't necessarily stop airflow.
Right. So then there's some sort of vapor, like a barrier, like a plastic
seal,
wrap type thing.
Over the years, there have been different approaches. The most recent one is basically the same way that they seal ductwork inside a home. It's an elastomeric sealant that's pushed in under pressure or spray applied, and it finds all the little gaps in the house, in the building shell, and seals them up. And now your insulation is much more effective. You're not transporting that water vapor that we can't even see, right? The humid air in the house isn't going into framing voids, which in the wintertime can be really cold, right? Because of that building shell leakage. And that warm, moist air going into cold framing voids will condense. And now we're surrounded by mold that we can't even see. We don't know is there.
Interesting. And so then, but on a lot of newer builds, these high rises, it's more standard
because of the concern about fire safety.
Interesting. But that also is helping for water and other things in the way it is. Okay.
Right.
Good to know. All right. Well, then maybe I just, that direction's safe then as a buyer. But yeah, I've seen so many issues on the, let's, call it like low rise type product where it's, they're not doing that.
No.
And then it's,
I inspected one 1920s era high rise on the Lakeshore Drive, and I was up on the 20-something floor, and they had recently remodeled the bathroom, and they put in one of those plastic access panels to get to the valves behind like the toilet and sink. I took that plastic access panel off, and the air coming out of that plumbing chase all the way from the basement would almost knock my baseball cap off my head. It was that strong. That's what they call the stack effect. Right?
Yeah.
The stack effect is just how air moves in a chimney stack, right? Air is going to flow vertically in a building and try and get out the top.
Yeah.
And in a high rise, especially unsprinklered 1920s vintage high rise, if you have a fire in the basement and that volume of air movement in the plumbing chases, that's a disaster waiting to happen.
Wow. Yeah, that is, and then too, with with COVID, I mean, I heard this was just like an article where there was some building where everyone in a tier, so in a stack, they got it.
Yes, I think that happened in China, right?
Yeah, that was probably read the same article.
The first,
where it was everyone in this tier got it.
Right.
They were testing the sewer to confirm this, and they're
Yeah, that's why that whole fomite deal was overblown from day one, and the air transmission is like, indoor air quality is a big deal.
Yeah, well, right. If it's a respiratory disease, but COVID, but we need to wipe our groceries down.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We're gonna look. That's not living up so well in retrospect here.
And not to go off on a tangent, but man, that contamination of indoor air and the role that HVAC plays in indoor air quality and occupant health is really tremendous.
So then with HVAC, what would you just mentioned that. What would something a buyer should be thinking about with HVAC that comes to mind?
Yeah, well, investors are typically less concerned about the indoor air quality aspect, and even a lot of times the energy efficiency aspect, right? Because the tenants are going to be responsible for the utility bills. And, indoor air quality is a nice thing to have, but not every investor has that uppermost in mind.
So more just the basics. What's the age of the equipment?
Yeah, as far as what the investor's concerns are, age and safety, right? Because you've got a big liability there if something goes wrong with carbon monoxide, right? So the venting of the furnaces, nowadays there's a lot of high efficiency furnaces which are much safer, especially if they're bringing outside air in for combustion. But the older furnaces that were what they call natural draft, right? They depend just on the buoyancy of the waste gas to
go out
flow
a chimney
into the chimney and out to the atmosphere. Those can be really dangerous if we're not careful and if we don't look carefully at the dynamics involved, right? Is there enough makeup air for that furnace to safely operate and to get those gases out of the house?
Yep.
And there's a lot of things that can impact that, right? Especially if we have a fireplace in the unit. If we have bathroom and kitchen exhaust fans that are moving a lot of air out of that apartment, they can create a negative pressure.
Yeah, so we have less makeup air then. Yeah.
And it can impede the movement of the exhaust gas from the furnace and the water heater.
Yeah.
Either of which can create a big carbon monoxide issue.
Because I was thinking about the same, I was going to say the same thing applies to water heaters, especially in multi-unit buildings where you might have a water heater in the basement. Same kind of design you'd see in a house where it's just, passively venting through the chimney. But when you get into these larger deals, they're all power vent, which means there's a blower on the top and it's pushing it out.
Actively pushing that gas out.
On a specific chimney for that water heater or for the furnaces. They have the same sort of setup.
Some older multifamilies, you'll see 6 or 8 water heaters in a row, all commonly vented into a masonry chimney. And one thing that should be looked at is on either side of the draft hood of those water heaters, where the hot and cold pipes come out of the top of the water heater, there's little plastic grommets around there, typically blue on the cold and red on the hot. And they're right next to that draft hood where the exhaust gas flows out. And if those little plastic grommets are melted, you have an exhaust gas issue that could result in carbon monoxide coming into the house.
Interesting. What other tips like that do you have? Something basic you can look at while you're walking through?
So if you look at the chimney on pretty much any modern equipment that doesn't vent with the PVC pipe, like the high efficiency equipment, you should see at the top of this chimney a metal pipe sticking out, not just the clay tile, right? Okay. It should have a metal liner in it for safest removal of the exhaust gas and the carbon monoxide.
But realistically, to see that though as a buyer, you're on the roof, you're looking down the chimney. That's
on smaller properties, you might be able to see it from the ground, but you'd have to get on the roof to see it.
And then generally, you want to see a cap on that. I'd imagine we don't want animals and rain getting in your chimney.
Yes,
if you're gonna go through all the trouble of having a liner, you might as well.
And then a bird goes in there.
Yeah, has to go for the cap as well.
Right, or a squirrel.
Yeah. It's interesting. Just kind of everything you've mentioned, I've seen it, and then like at buildings I've been looking at or bought, or even as you're explaining this thing with the water heaters, like I was
You're
buying
going
the deal.
back into
Well, in my memory, yeah,
right.
like one where you're explaining this, where you're like, and then if it all go to the chimney, I've been in deals where the water heater, a giant one, it's venting to the chimney, and then the vent it fell, and you're like, well, that's not safe. Like, why is this not fixed? We're all like, this basement's not even safe to be in, basically.
Speaking of things that people can look at in their walkthroughs, investors, potential purchasers, another one is water pressure, right? So, and the way we typically test that, just a simple functional flow test, is to go to, especially an upper floor, right? Because we're fighting the head pressure. Water has to go up. It work hard to get to the top floor. Go up and operate multiple hot water fixtures, because typically the hot water piping is more subject to that mineral accumulation that results in reduced flow.
I know why that would be. Why would that be? This is an easy way to remember it. Do you?
Because the minerals come out of solution easier in hot water, I believe.
Oh,
right?
interesting. I also thought it's sitting there in the hot water heater, and just kind of you're heating it up. You're doing something to it where now minerals are going to collect in the hot water heater, and you're going to be over time adding. So you have the regular amount of minerals plus now as your hot water heater tank gets old, you're adding
That's
to it.
certainly possible.
That's what I always assumed, because that's where, I mean, if you want for a funny inspection thing, go YouTube people what the hot water heaters cut open, what they look like, the tanks.
Yeah,
It's
right.
Once you've had the thing for a while, it's like a half minerals built up, or
on the bottom.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyways, so but you want to go to the top of the building and then run multiple hot water.
So what I'll do is that
water.
the largest demand on hot water flow is typically the bathtub. So first I'll go to the sink, turn the hot water on at the sink, then flush the toilet, and then open the bathtub hot water faucet. And then while I'm looking at the sink hot water, I'll throttle on and off
Okay.
the bathtub hot water and see how much fluctuation there is in that sink hot water. And that's typically a pretty good indicator of how much time we have left on the need to replace the old galvanized pipe. Or perhaps there could be some other issues too, right? There could be clogged aerators. There could be an undersized or leaking water service, an old lead service. So you can't typically, just by that simple functional flow test, you get a feel for the general water pressure in the building, but you can't usually pinpoint the exact cause.
Right, but you know if you have an issue or not, potentially, just on an initial walkthrough.
Right, and then your observations in the basement, if you find or behind the vanity cabinets in the bathrooms, if you see old galvanized piping, then you're pretty sure what the deal is, right?
Yeah, and that's something too that over time I've learned to look for just on the initial tour, where a lot of these deals, again, the person selling it, there's no point, honestly, for them to study up on every little detail of the building. They're not going to be the owner. Their job is just to get the highest price.
Right.
So they're not checking what the pipes are made out of. And then even if you see a copper pipe, let's say, out of that vanity, it doesn't mean there's copper throughout the whole building.
Right.
Maybe that's just they renovated the bathroom and it ran
and they tied into the wall.
Yeah, to the galvanized riser in the wall, and then but you can over time you learn where to figure that all out. Now you can find if there's a basement what the riser is by looking in the ceiling if it's open, and go, okay, what do we got here? We have
shine your flashlight up the plumbing chest.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you look in the ceiling, you go, okay, we have a galvanized pipe, and galvanized is stainless steel or just regular steel.
It's regular steel coated with zinc.
And so that's, so that looks like what you would think a silver kind of color. And then over time,
a little dullish.
Yeah. But in terms of the types, and then, because then it went from, at least in the Midwest, really, or in the Chicago area, it started out where it's, in most buildings you'll see it's galvanized or copper. There's not, in a lot of other areas we've looked at stuff, there are a lot of other intermediary products they let you use.
Polybutylene and PEX now, right?
Yeah, but none of that stuff's been allowed in Chicago. So it's
a PVC.
Yeah, so it's simple. Yeah, I was just at my sister's house in Austin, and they have their plumbing was a clear plastic.
Like a bendable?
I guess I didn't. I was just looking at it and I didn't
gotta
try
be
bending
PEX
it.
then.
But I've seen PEX, but it's usually blue
or
is
what,
been my
red.
experience.
Right.
Yeah, but
It's
they
also
were
clear. Yeah.
Yeah. So in at this house, this is in Austin, Texas, and they went with a clear.
Yeah.
It actually looked pretty nice compared to having like a blue thing hanging out the wall. So
And it's much more efficient, great water flow, right? There's a lot of positives to it.
yeah. So at least, and so if you're looking at it, you want to understand the difference where, if you see a galvanized pipe, over time those rust from the inside and your water pressure starts dropping. So if you see that, and let's say it's a renovation project you're going to take on, you're not going to be able to just go, especially if your water pressure is bad. Okay, I'll just redo the kitchen only. Like
Right.
you really are signing up now. You got to redo all the plumbing as well.
Right.
So it's important to check that. And I mean, the easiest place to check to start is under the sinks.
Yeah.
Because then there's going to be a pipe running out from the sink.
Through the back of the cabinet.
Yeah. In the bathroom or the kitchen out into the wall.
Right.
So that's the easiest place to catch it. A lot of times it's dark and there's a lot of stuff in these cabinets because
Right.
people live there. So what I do is I turn my phone to where the flash is forced to on. Then I take a picture of it and then I look at the picture. It's actually easier than shining your flashlight or your phone as a flashlight and then
Moving the toilet paper out of the way.
trying to see it. Yeah, or even it's harder to see. Whereas, I mean, I don't know what iPhone number we're on now, but I have the most recent one, 13 or something. But it's takes great pictures. Why bother putting your head in the cabinet? You can just reach your arm in and take a much more clear picture.
sure.
Plus, when you forget in 2 weeks anyways what the heck you saw, you can look at the pictures.
Right.
So yeah, that's something I always check. Even if it's not a renovation deal, I want to know what we're getting ourselves into. And then I do the same thing with all the HVAC equipment. Like I want to go see the approximate ages, roughly what we have going on here. Because again, like in my experience, most of these mechanical items, their useful life is really like 10 years.
Right.
So, we're talking appliances, which including washer and dryers, water heaters, furnaces,
Right.
air conditioning condensers. So just I want to know what I'm getting myself into, and most of these they have the date they were made on the sticker.
Yeah. A lot of them are the dates right there. Some you have to go online. There's a great website, buildingcenter.org, and you can go and there's a decoder there. You can plug in the serial number, and it'll tell you when the age was what the age of the appliance is.
Yeah, because it says manufacturer, then has a clear date, just normal month, year, easy, and then some there's not, and then you need to decode the serial number. Yeah, and so those I'm looking for like an easy. I'm walking through. We decided to go look at the HVAC on the roof or whatever, and all the dates are on the sticker, and it says, R22 2004.
Right.
I know what I'm signing up for.
Right.
And if you don't know that, you're signing up to replace pretty quick.
Unexpected expenses.
Because in most states, R22 gas is illegal now, and if not,
It's not illegal.
Or what happened? Why are we not?
Well, it's no longer allowed to be manufactured in the U.S. or imported into the U.S.
Right. Okay.
And so, therefore, it's becoming very expensive and hard to find.
Yeah. So then that is right, and I should have said that differently because it's right. If you have R22 gas, you're not going to be arrested, but it's your.
You can still buy it. You can find it on eBay.
Yeah.
But it's
very
dear.
expensive. So you recharge your old unit and you're already, a quarter or a third of the way to just buying a new one.
Exactly.
Yeah. Although then you get in the whole thing of, do we need to do the coil in the furnace too now?
Yep.
And also you're switching gas and, do you need different lines? There's a lot to figure out on this at times. But just for starters, you don't need to know all that. But grabbing the dates and knowing how am I compared to this 10-year mark, that's important. Then you can budget. Because then if I was buying that deal and all that equipment in this hypothetical is that old, it's 2004, I know I'm going to have it for a while, I'm just start budgeting to either replace them over time, just do a few a year, or we're just going to do it all up front. So, and that just depends on what your deal is. If you're doing a full renovation, like those got to be changed during that. So.
Getting back to the plumbing side, though, another thing that can be expensive and important, you've probably run into it, is the cast iron stacks, right?
Yeah.
So if you can find out if let's say you're buying a 1920s type building, or even earlier, if they're the original cast iron stacks, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to have to get into the wall and replace those.
What would you say it's a useful life on cast iron?
Well, if you look online, it'll tell you 60 to 80 years. But I've certainly seen it older, and I've seen it fail sooner. So
Yeah. Yeah, and that too. One thing, we've used a company in Phoenix, Inspect First is their name, and they you set up an appointment with them for the inspection, and they bring out a plumber and a pest inspector, just all in kind of one scheduling,
Right.
and then the plumbing inspector they camera all the stacks,
yeah,
even,
that's excellent.
which that's
That's
that I
unusual.
was impressed by.
Yeah.
Because that's something where here I've seen all sorts of there was a deal that we did not buy because once we did the physical inspection, it was a courtyard building that you inspected, and then another.
In Humboldt.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
we don't. Yeah, okay, I didn't know if you
Yeah,
said
yeah.
that address.
40 some units.
And yeah,
Beverly was with me.
yeah, but
Yeah.
that one the sewer was broken in over 20 over 20 places,
Yeah.
so we didn't want to
Right.
mess with it.
Yeah.
So that one we didn't want to get into, but that was going to be, because again, it's like what I was saying when I went in that building, that was, the stairs were wood and it had built-ins. You could tell it was nice. This, in what we cameraed, there was broken in 20 places.
Wow.
What do you think the stacks are like in the
exactly.
building?
Right.
So
So
I'm like-
I'll always take my flashlight to the roof, and I'll look down the stacks from the roof, and you can usually get a pretty good feel for the condition of them. You'll see how much corrosion there is on them, how thin they're getting.
What
If
is
there's cracks.
what does an older cast iron look like then?
It's really rough inside because of the corrosion, and sometimes cracked, and quite often it's blocked.
Yeah.
So there's debris in there, and they're not acting as a plumbing vent any longer, right? So then you get siphoning of the drains and sewer gas coming into the units.
Right. Yeah, because one thing with a drain, you need airflow up for the water to actually flow down.
Right. It's an easy avenue for sewer gas to get out to the atmosphere and not come into the building, and it prevents the siphoning of the drain traps. Right.
Yeah.
Let's say you flush the toilet, and that water going through the pipe is pulling on everything behind it. Right, as it flows through, it's like a venturi. It's just like driving down the street with your car window rolled down, smoking a cigarette. The air from outside is pulling on that cigarette smoke. The same thing happens when you flush the toilet. It pulls on all the drains behind, the bathtub drain and the sink drain. And if it pulls out the water in that P-trap, now there's nothing blocking sewer gas from coming up through the drain.
Right. And that's a real common thing as an owner. If there's a sewer smell, first thing is get water in your drains.
Right.
That's
the floor drains. Right?
Yeah.
And sometimes they're concealed. They might be, so maybe somebody carpeted over the floor drain in the basement, or they put the laundry unit over the floor drain, and now they don't know it's there.
Yeah, because those need water sitting in them to keep the gas from coming out. Yeah. Nice. Well, yeah. Let's think. Maybe let's just close with some.
We're done already?
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that was quick.
Yeah. A story or two. Like, so what would be some of that comes to mind? Like, actually, I have some ideas on the types. What's a worst story if you got it on like an owner sticking around that you got?
I don't know if I have a worst story. A couple come to mind. One is a single family home inspection. The guy was holding his little dog, and the dog bit me 3 times before the guy finally took the dog and put him in the garage. And then in general, when owners are hanging around like a fart in a phone booth, as they say, it's a sign that they're trying to determine whether or not you're going to find the issues that they know are there, and they're very concerned that you're going to find those or not. So I find it an interesting dynamic when the client's there. But over the years, I've learned to just tune all that out, and I don't care who's there. I'm going to just kind of stick my nose. As you probably know, I don't do a lot of chit-chat. I try and just kind of observe and document.
Yeah, because that's right. I would just think there's been plenty of times where, anytime you point something out, there's the owner on some of these. They're there with their commentary,
or the realtor, and they're going to take exception to your statements, and it's like I don't have time for that.
So, what would be like the craziest thing that you found in an inspection?
I don't know about crazy, but one of the oddest ones, I took a picture of it. It's lost now somewhere in the terabytes of photos I have. But the air conditioning condenser was on the roof, and they had mounted it on an old mattress because they couldn't stand the vibration
Yeah.
coming through the roof anymore.
That's in the guide on how to install it. It's mattress, and this is
Vibration
yeah.
control, right? Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, I've never seen that. That's good. I got what I was gonna say and then what about any sort of like something that was repaired, let's say, but just repaired in a crazy way.
repairs.
Yeah.
Or you see a lot, coffee cans used instead of drain pipes, and radiator hoses instead of P traps, and all kinds of crazy electrical stuff. Actually, one inspection I was on, the electrical box was glowing, during the inspection. So yeah.
You don't want that?
No, that's probably not
Nah, just kidding.
a wise purchase at that point, at least. So.
Yeah, and then and then in terms of things to look out for that I do too, I have tried to, in any market we're in, get a gauge for
Cloth wire.
what kind of wire is a problem in that
right.
market that's being used, and then know what you're getting
Aluminum.
yourself into. Right. And because we've been buying deals in Phoenix too, and then been looking other places, and a lot of these other areas, weren't as strict as Chicago over the years on what to use. And I mean, Chicago, they're still in the old days, basically using cast iron and
Right.
Copper and
Well,
stuff.
they're
And
trying to liberalize that. Right now, they're doing pilot projects where you can.
I know, but I still have not walked into a building myself where I've seen that used.
Right.
I don't think.
No.
But then in these other places, they've allowed much more. Like there's a lot of aluminum wiring, and then a lot of just those breaker boxes that are like the Federal Pacific ones,
Pacific
and the
or
breaker.
Zinsco or-
And so this. You want to know what's in your market, what to look out for,
Right.
and that's usually for me starts
Chinese
with
drywall.
Yeah, is
Right.
that's that's I've not ran into that.
No,
That was
I haven't seen any in the Chicago area at all.
I know in Florida that was a huge thing in the condo boom
along the southern coast, the Gulf Coast especially.
Yeah, and so for me, what I usually am looking at when I get in, and we've touched on a lot of it, is HVAC. Because I want to assess like what are we getting into age-wise, and then what kind of equipment is it? If it's the modern type, or what are we looking at?
Right.
And then plumbing, if it's here, copper or galvanized. Other places are using other materials too.
Right.
And let's see what else.
Electric.
Electric. Always look at that. Yeah. And this is on this kind of initial walkthrough. Windows. I want to know what they are. Like single pane, double pane, what is it? Is really hard for me to tell. So actually my tip, what I've been doing to tell if it's single or double pane, is I put my finger on it and I can see if I'm touching the other. I never, honestly, I never figured that out till like a year or two ago. And
Or just look for the spacer bar, right?
I don't know. I have a hard time seeing
the
that.
two.
Yeah. I'm not, the finger thing has
But
been
even, some double pane windows, there's a lot of very low quality builder grade windows that were installed over the years that are not performing very well, especially in rental situations, right, where the occupants are a little bit rough with the windows. And even though they're relatively modern vinyl windows, they still have to cover them in plastic in the wintertime because they're so breezy. Or they'll install them without the proper clearances, right? So you look at the space between the frame of the window and the movable component, the sash. And a lot of times it's wide, and the weather stripping isn't compressed and making contact, and it's just going to be really drafty.
Hot and cold air,
right?
So I'd say those are the big things, and then always the exterior, like the masonry. What condition is that in? If it's a brick building or stucco or whatever it is.
And that's a good point. The number one place where the water is going to come in and become visible is along the top edge of the window. So if you're walking through a property, bring a flashlight, and at every window, shine your flashlight along the top of the window jamb, because that's where you're going to see those stains, the drip marks.
And a lot of times too, like, I mean, there's metal that water come in contact with, so you'll see like a rust looking metal on there, or water on there.
Right.
And then let's see what else. And I think the last one is roof. What's the situation with the roof? And it depends again on the market, but it's one thing that I've learned is if you have a pitched roof, a lot less problems than a flat roof.
Right.
That there's, water runs off the pitched roof. These flat roofs, it's
not only with regard to the roof itself, but also with regard to the exterior walls. So those single white concrete block buildings that were built, so many were built of for 30 or 40 years here in Chicago. The ones that have a peaked roof or pitched roof are much less likely to have water problems coming through the walls.
Right, because it starts at the top, right? If you have a flat roof, your parapet wall, it could be
the
taken.
parapet's exposed on two sides to moisture. And when you have an attic, though, the open cores of the concrete block can evaporate the moisture out into the attic. There's that stack effect where there's always
You've
air
told me this.
flowing through the concrete block up into the attic and out through the roof vents. So there's much less likely to have moisture problems in that kind of building.
Yeah, I believe it.
So a lot of people are like, oh, should I buy a building made out of concrete block, especially split face block? And, the answer is that you don't always have to throw the baby out with the bathwater on those. Sometimes it can be an okay purchase.
And do you recommend sealing that, the split face block, or what would you do?
Sealing is not cheap. So if there's indications that there's water coming in, absolutely, it's got to be sealed because the flashing wasn't installed properly, right? So you have to, when those buildings were built, they were built as masonry walls that are called drainage walls. So every masonry building is constructed with the understanding that it is possible for water to get into the wall. A drainage wall will control the moisture, allow it to flow down through cavities, and then out the bottom. It'll hit the flashing above the windows and doors or at the base of the foundation and then flow out through the weep holes or weep ropes. When a building is built without proper flashing, you typically have to convert your train of thought from a drainage wall to a barrier wall, right? We have to go, whoops, the flashing's not right. We're not going to take the wall apart and retrofit all the flashings. So let's just make sure that no water can get behind that skin,
Right,
the face of the building. And that's through sealing, high build coating, elastomeric coatings, and caulking and all that stuff.
Right, and then you got to make sure you're not taking water from the top too. It doesn't do any good to seal the wall from the
right, and you have to make
wall.
sure that water can still get out if it gets in.
And so that would be done with the
weeps.
Okay, yeah, ideally you have some flashing, and weeps are ropes that are in the masonry.
Ropes aren't real effective. Weep tubes or weep grates, like little plastic grates, are much better. Right, you can actually get some flow out.
Yep, we see those at this building where they got those in between every few bricks instead of the mortar. Right. Great. Well, then what sort of, so we talked, just let's touch on this, like what other sort of services does Domicile have? So we just talked only inspections, but I know you do other
residential, commercial inspections. We do energy consults. We do forensic work if somebody's having, especially with moisture related. Comfort issues. People are having comfort issues. People are having odor problems in buildings. How to hopefully try and improve the compartmentalization to alleviate those problems. So
a lot of services if you have issues after you bought a property as well, forensic type stuff, and then also it's things if you're buying a property, you see, let's say we have a water issue. I know you guys do. One of the things is thermal imaging. You can see where the water is potentially coming in. How does that work?
So thermal imaging, it's a good tool. It's not, as many people think, some kind of all-knowing, all-seeing device. It's dependent on a lot of things. And most importantly is what the recent weather conditions have been. If we haven't had rain for a long time, well, your thermal imaging isn't going to pick up any moisture resulting from a leak in the roof or the walls, right? So the most important tool is between the ears of the inspector.
There you go. Great. And then how do we get in touch with Domicile?
312-488-1461, and the fabulous Deb Marietta will answer your phone and take care of scheduling.
Great. And then what a website?
DomicileConsulting.com.
Perfect. All right. Yeah. Thanks for being on, Dan. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good.
Great.
Always good talking to you.
Great job. Hopefully you guys all learned a lot. We jumped around a bit there, but got some tips and practical things mixed in. So
good deal.
Great. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for joining us on the Rise and Invest podcast. Please be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you enjoy your podcasts. If you'd like to dive even deeper into real estate investing, check out our company's website, riseinvest.com, where we have numerous free resources and information that can help both active and passive real estate investors. Our 100-plus page passive investing guidebook, our trends report, and our blog are all available on our website. If you are an accredited investor, you can get started today as a passive investor in our multifamily investment opportunities by hitting the Invest Now button on our website.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of Drew Breneman and guests as of the date of recording and do not purport to reflect the views or opinions of Rise Invest Holdings LLC and its subsidiaries. The views and opinions are provided for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon or deemed as investment or tax advice or an offer to buy or sell securities, and the speaker cannot be held responsible for any direct or incidental loss incurred by applying any of the information offered.